Hello, I'm Damian. As already mentioned, I'm a core team member in Vue, and today I'm going to talk about validations and forms in the composition age, which is the upcoming big thing for Vue 3.0. So first, what I'm doing, I'm running the official Vue.js newsletter and news platform, as we call it. So if you're not yet a subscriber, I would like you to join if you're looking for some nice and like an easy way to be up to date with whatever is happening in Vue. I'm also doing some open source work. You might be familiar with some of those, which is Vue Multiselect, Vuelidate, and Vue Global Events, with the latter being my favorite because it requires almost no maintenance because of how simple it is. That's the best libraries you can get. Anyway, I'm also a technical lead in CourseDoc, which is service for US-based universities where we provide solutions for scheduling, events management, and curriculum management also. Thank you. And I would like to thank all of my supporters or sponsors on GitHub, which is currently Storyblog and Vue Mastery. Thank you very much. And also to all of the individuals, which I won't be listing here, but everything matters to me very much. And thank you very much. You can use this link if you choose to support my open source work. So back to the topic, validations in the composition age. First, let's rehearse shortly or see what solutions we already have in Vue 2.x. So I think the most popular validation solution is Vuelidate. And I like to call it the template-driven validation framework. And it looks like this. I'm not sure whether you see my pointer, but that's all right. Okay, so the way it works, you're passing the all the rules and set up all the rules inside the template, and then using a slot, you can get the validation outputs, and you can display those in any way you want, right? Then there is Vuelidate, which is an alternative approach created originally by me and Pavel Grabash. And the way it works, it's more towards the model, so it's not really coupled to the template. And as you can see on the screen, it has you're declaring your validations in a way that the rules have to match the data structure. So in this case, we have the password and repeat password, and they have to be this. The structure has to match the internal component state. So in this case, we only have data, but if we had like Vuex getters or computed properties, we could also validate the output of those properties. So if we had like first name, last name, and then a computed property called full name, we could set up some validations on full name if we need that for some reason. But there are some problems with the current version of Vuelidate. So the way it's built, it doesn't really support lazy validation support or lazy validations. There's also no way to easily manage error messages. Like it's up to you to get the error results and set up some error messages, which is good and bad depending on it might increase the learning curve on actually using it. There is a very so-so support for async validators, which is a big thing when you're doing validations, and you are actually caring a lot on the user experience. And also it requires you to set up all of the validation rules for the whole data model upfront. So in your component, like if you have nested structures, even you have nested components, you still have to declare all of the validation results in the component where you create the in the root component. So it's very hard because of this. For this reason, it's very hard to share validation results between components. If you had a child component that has their own validations, you would have to send it through an event to the top or the parent component or like any ancestor, which is probably not the best way or easiest way to do. And yeah, and there, because of the way Vue 2.x is working, we had to incorporate some quite nasty hacks to make it work, which ended up making the code base very hard to maintain and contribute to. So yeah, this is something we would like to change. So now let's enter Vue 3.0, which is the upcoming version Vue. And for that, we would like to, we are working on a new Vuelidate, which you can check the progress on if you go to the to GitHub and then to the next branch. So some quick facts about the new Vuelidate. First of all, it's a complete rewrite. So we basically throw out all of the Vuelidate core code and build it from the very scratch. It's built for now only for Vue 3.0, but we think we might get, using the Vue.js composition API plugin, we might be able to get it back to support with Vue 2.x, but with the plugin's help. But we'll see, because there might be some small differences in how how the plugin will handle the refs and so on, because in Vue 3, it's using proxies, and with 2.x, we have to somehow make it work with getters and setters, which might introduce some its own issues. After rewriting it, because it's mostly done, we figured that thanks to the new functionalities that Vue 3 gives us, we ended up with like half the code and like quarter the complexity. And if you compare the core of Vuelidate 2.x with the old version, you will probably end up with similar results as in conclusions. Yeah. So it's also mostly backwards compatible with some recent changes that we made. So there are some things that we want to deprecate, but it's not as problematic, we hope. And also it's pretty lightweight, so with minimalization and zip, it is around 2 kilobytes, which is, I think, pretty good. So here's a very straightforward example of how you can use Vuelidate, and let's start with just using the composition API setup function, which is the new feature in Vue 3.0, and I hope you are somewhat familiar, but if not, then let me just walk you through it very quickly. So there is a new function called which allows you to create reactive reference to value, and it can be an object, but it can also be a primitive. So in this case, we would be creating two variables, password and repeat password, which will initiate with empty strings. And then whatever we return from the setup, those properties will be available for the whole component. So this is kind of similar as to the data, I'd say. And then this is now Vuelidate coming. So what we how we can use Vuelidate, the new version. So we have to import the use Vuelidate, which is following the approach to prefix the composition functions with views, kind of like React hooks, I think. So in this case, we will be doing, we will pass two arguments. First, we need to pass an object of that contains the rules. And then we pass the state that we want to validate. So in this case, and we don't really have the rules object yet, but we will have in a moment. So first we pass the rules, then we pass the state, and we just wrap it inside an object. And then once we add the rules, it looks like this. So as you can see, we have our rules object is a simple object where we have the password, and those are gonna be the validation rules for the password state that we have inside the second argument. And in this case, we have we want to make it required and also expect a minimal length of the string of 7. And then the repeat password, we just need one validator, which is same as, and then we pass the property or the variable that we want to compare to. So in this case, we want to ensure that repeat password is same as password, and this is how you do it. And then once you do that, the output what you get is almost the same as what you had in Vuelidate, the old version of Vuelidate, which is an object with all of the validation state, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So yeah, that's the moment. Let me click here, and hopefully it works. Oh yeah, it does. So this is the preview. This is, as you can see, is the the object that I just mentioned, so the output of the validations. And here we have the our first code example, so the lazy validation. So this is one of the new additions. So first of all, and let me open the DevTools here. So first of all the validators are by default lazy. So I could type here, or maybe let's take a quick look here. So first, declare the user email and password variables. We pass the first object, which is the rules. So we have user email, required email, and logger, and then password, which is also required and has a min length of 7. And then we pass the state that we want to validate. And as you can see, the user email here matches the user email in this structure. So as in the same level of nesting and so on. And then we just return from the setup the variables. We have a simple submit function that calls touch to change the state of the validation to dirty. And quick look at the template. So we have form text where we have the email here, where we use vmodel to update the user email. And then we have a special thing, which is a proxy to the original password property, but thanks to using the $$ model, we are able to trigger the dirty state automatically when the user interacts with it. So, and as you can see, this is this lazy, logger validator. And as you can see, validators in Vuelidate are simple functions. Can be an object, but baseline, they are simple functions that have to return either true or false, depending whether the value is true or not. So we have this logger in the user email. So when I type here, in the previous version of Vuelidate, you would expect that it will trigger the console log, but right now, this is not what is happening because it's lazy by default. But if I click submit, which will trigger the dirty state by using the $touch method, you can see now that whenever I type, the logger is executed, and we get this console log in the console, right? If I reset and then just type, nothing happens because it's back to it's inactive because the state of the whole validation is it's not dirty. So also because we are using this model here, once I start typing in the password, you can see that this field turns dirty, and if you scroll in here, you will see that it is actually dirty, but this doesn't mean the whole form is dirty, right? So let's take a look at another example, which is nested validations. So here, let me maybe, okay, just make some more space here. So nested validations, and this is probably one of the solution for one of the biggest problems, what I mentioned, assigning validation states between different components. So here we have this nested validation wrapper, and this is this component is the wrapper form here, and nested A component. And what we are doing here is just using Vuelidate without any arguments, and this creates our validation results, right? But then inside nested A, let me go here and let me find nested A. We are using Vuelidate normally, and then we are passing the treat argument, which is a string that is will be used to register the value for within any parent or ancestor of our of this component. And actually, this component also uses another nested B component, which is doing mostly the same, which is with registering its own validation results as deeply nested form in the parent, and then the parent will combine it and send it to the to its parent. And let me increase the size of the code. I hope it's better now. Okay, so let's click on that submit button, but I'm gonna get back to the nested validations here. So this is the output, and once I click submit, you will see that the submit was actually triggering the dirty state on the wrapper form, but it will also trigger the dirty state on all of the nested validations. So if you have like a big form and you have smaller components that have their own validation rules, they will automatically be dirty and will show their own error messages, for example, right? And of course, like there is no issues with passing the requirements for passing the validation requirements down through props or something like that's also something that will be working out of the box, and it doesn't really require you any additional work except for just using Vuelidate without any arguments, and thanks to provide inject, it will get all of the child components or any descendant errors inside this component. And if this component is within another component that also is calling use Vuelidate, the parent will also get it. So it's just being collected from all of the descendant and then sent to the very root component that is using use Vuelidate. Okay, and then we have the use composition example, which is very similar in that, except that we can, thanks to the way we are using Vuelidate, we can extract the whole like pieces of our validation logic and like some component state. For example, if we have used, in this example, we have used signup, which creates username, password, repeat password, sets up the rules for those properties, creates new Vuelidate here, also a method to touch, and then if it's correct, it creates a new account, or in this case, just sends us an alert, and then it just returns. And for convenience, I just kept it inside one file, but we could just like move it to a different, like use signup composable and store it there. And then in our component, we can, and we can of course pass any arguments to our composition function. But here in our component, we are just doing use signup, take the password, take the repeat password and username variables, take the signup function and the validation results, and just return those here in our component. And this is what we get. And so I can start typing here, and it doesn't really work right now, as in because it's not valid, but let me get it right. And also there is here is an example of a custom validator which uses the async flag, which in this case is set to true because it's an asynchronous validator. And as you can see, And this is also a new thing. All of the validators in Vuelidate, in the new Vuelidate, come with pre-existing messages, and you can set your own messages like this. So it can either be a static string or it can be a function, like in this case. And the function will receive the model, and it also will receive the pending status and some other properties, like, for example, all the arguments or params that were passed there. So in this case, we had this would be the param, so the 7 is the param or requirement. So if I'm typing, if I type, it's gonna say it's already in use, but if I change, it's okay, and I can confirm. So let's get back to the presentation. 1 second. Okay, demo time. So yeah, this is the explanation for the nested validations. So as you can see, all the components, and each of those blocks represents a component. They report to their nearest ancestor, and that ancestor will report to the top 2, their nearest ancestor. And on the way, it will merge all of the nested validation rules. So the parent can see all of the validation rules of the child components. And I think I haven't shown it here, so let me just roll back here and show you that here we have the validation results from our nested components, and they are available on this new property called errors, which contains all of the validation errors from our child components. So if I change here, you can see that the root validation outputs is now just this one single error. But if I change it, you will see that it's properly. And this will make it much easier to actually show all of the errors. So for example, in this case, all we need to do is pass those errors property here to a component where we just iterate over all of the errors and just show an error message like this. This is exactly what it does, or here. Okay, back to the presentation. So, animations. Yep. Okay, thank you. So, what I mentioned, built-in error messages support, but to not first of all of the 21 built-in validators that we already have, they have the messages and params already set up. And this is the list of all of the validators that we have. It's not much, but it's pretty cool. Like a nice starting point, I'd say. And right now, they will be all stored in, or they are already stored in a separate repository, in a separate project, which you can import from at Vuelidate/validators. And this also means that it's fully tree shakeable. So the only rules that you will end up shipping to your clients are only the ones that you import. And if you're using lazy loading for components, it gets even better because, yeah, you will only ship the validators that you use within specific components. It's a separate package. It has a separate release cycle, and it's very easy to contribute because this is how a validator looks like. And in this case, we have two library. We have, or in the package, we have two versions of those validators. So one is just a function which returns true or false, and you can find those in the row catalog. And then there is the full version of the validator, which has a built-in message, built-in params, asynchronous, and so on and so on. And you can submit as many pull requests for your custom validators, because we don't really care, because it won't change the size of the package, as in the actual size of the code that will be shipped to the users, because they are fully tree shakeable. So I think this is a big win, and it should make it very easy to build like a very large set of validators ready to use, even for very, very niche cases. So what about backwards compatibility? So this is how Vuelidate was used previously, and this is also the syntax that is fully working right now. And the only difference is that you will have to use this.password, for example, with save as instead of passing like a locator string. But yeah, you should be able to, if you're already using Vuelidate, you should be able to move to the next version quite smoothly once you move to Vue 3, or we end up having updated version, a version targeted for Vue 2.x. Okay, so and why is it changing? Okay, forms. So in my work, I'm building quite a lot of forms, right? And this is how they look like. And if you were to ask, like, hey, how would you create a form like this, right? But we would just say probably, well, I just put some template here. There, a special component to handle this kind of field, and that's it, right? Except it gets a bit more complicated, and you might notice that edit button. So in CourseDoc, what we need to do is actually allow the user to build their own forms, and it can be anything, starting from like some simple fields to also very specific components that handle things like meeting patterns and some kind of like there is a lot of complexity here, right? And so what would be the solution here? The one that I found out or decided to be the best one is a schema-based form, or a schema-based form generator. And there are already plenty of solutions for that, but at least for me and for an application the size of CourseDoc, where we already have lots of form elements and so on, it wasn't really something we could use, because most of those libraries come with their own components, and you are kind of forced to use them. So if you are already using Vuetify or Quasar, Vuetify or your own set of components, you kind of are stuck with like you just have to build a new, you have to ship a new set of components just for the schema-based forms, right? And often they don't really allow you to have some very specific forms, like for example, a field which looks like a button, and once you click on it, it opens a model with what you see is what you get editor, which usually is not a thing or a common thing with schema-based form generators. And then if you're already using Validator or Vuelidate, those solutions usually come up with their own validation libraries or validation logic. So if you were to use it, you would probably have to ship both, unless you get like refactor all of your code to always use the schema-based approach for all of the forms, which is also a solution, but yeah. So that's why I would like to introduce you to Vuelidate or Vuelidate, which is a lightweight schema generated form. It is created by Marina Mosti, along with the Vuelidate team helping out. And the main ideas here is bring your own components, which means we are not shipping any components except for the schema form. And it's fully working with any component that is compatible with vModel. So, and this is true for most of the components within Vueify and all of the popular libraries, component libraries. So anything, if you already have some components that are compatible with vModel, it's still gonna work. It's super lightweight. You can check out the source code in a moment, but first, let's do some demo. Okay. I think maybe we're not going to need the console. I don't know. Let's see. So first, schema form. So this is the template part. And as you can see, we pass the schema. We set up the V model here for the user data object that we can see the output here. And then we can see how we can build a form with this library. So here I'm going to import two components, which is form text and form checkbox, which are my own simple components. They're really very straightforward. So it's just an input, and that's it. And a label object. So what we have to do now is create an object, and it can also be an array. It's up to you. And the object property keys will be will have to match the expected result. So for example, we have first name, and once I type into first name, you will see that it will create a first name property on our output. Then we need to pass a component, and we are using this handy util function from Vue, which is macro, and it's not really required, but if I remove it, you will see that it might show or might not. Okay. So, but generally you need it for the to prevent Vue from trying to transform the component into a reactive form once you're returning the schema from your setup function or computer property or whatever. And then we have label. In this case, that's the label that you see here. And that's the rest of the schema. So in this case, it's going to be first name, last name, email, and then we have some extra config. And then we have isViewFan, which is using a different component with our label. So I can start typing, and here it is. It's pretty straightforward. The way I'm using it is just pass the schema, return the schema here, create an object that we will use to store the data, and that's it. Then we can use some more fancy schemas or build some more fancy schemas. So in this case, what we have here is we have very similar to our previous example, and then we have this email template where we are using a field which is email model, which I guess is not something that you will find in, like you could use in most schema-based solutions. And here, as you can see, I'm gonna start typing, and then once I get to the button, I click on it, and it opens a model where I can say, hello, HolyJS, hi. And then click save, and as you can see, it populated the output object with whatever the email model is actually outputting from the V model. So we are not really making any assumptions. It could output any structure, and it's still going to work just fine. And then we also have another select here, and we also have another button, which here, as you can see, will trigger the computer property that, depending on the isViewFan value, will either just return the schema or extend it with another property called feedback. And we can do, because it's true, we get this new input here. But if we just remove it, you will see that it's gone from the output value. And this is something that you can configure within Vuelidate. But in this example, we just assume that if something is gone from the schema, we want to remove it from the output or the data that we use to sort our information. Although sometimes if you are using a schema form for to manage a data object that is bigger and includes other keys, you want to turn it off just to, well, not clean it up of elements that you don't really want to have. Although the way it works, I think it will still allow you to keep properties that were never touched by the schema form itself. Okay, and then the last example here would be the formception, which is a schema which has another schema form inside. And to do that, you just use schema form that you use in this component again, and pass a new prop there with the schema, and this allows you to have a schema within a schema, and the output will look like this. As you can see, the nested here is going to be used as the data property under which we will be storing the contents of the nested schema. And yep, let's go back to our slides. Thank you. But what about form validations, right? So usually when you are doing form, you want to do validations, right? So in this case, I would like to officially introduce you to form Vuelidate. It sounds a bit Japanese, and that's because it's cool. So yeah, except not, just kidding. And this was a joke, but it feels very weird because I can't hear anyone laughing. Although I just agreed with Natalia that she would laugh, but she doesn't. So yeah, I'm left alone. That's fine. So going back to Formulate, what if we had a plugin system within our schema form that would allow us to easily connect different validation solutions? So yeah, coding time. Whoops. Okay, let's get here. So it's broken exactly how it should be. So the way we want to use our schema, and we'll be integrating or building a plugin system and a plugin for Vuelidate here, and hopefully I will be there's half an hour, so it should be good. So what we're gonna do here is we have a schema where we want to pass some additional validation rules. So we have email required for our fields, right? And this is mostly it. So we need a way to actually create those plugins, or even like support those plugins. So for that very reason, I created something called Schema Form Factory, and let me code it for you. And let me. Can I take some of that to a different screen? Nope, not really. Okay, that's gonna be crazy. Okay, so we have that's the wrong one here. So this is our factory, and there is something that we can do here, which is pretty interesting given how Vue with composition API works when we are using setup. And as you will take a look inside the schema form itself, you will see that the way it is constructed, it only has props and then a setup, and the whole component is stored or created within the setup, right? So the sneaky guy that I am, I figured why not just do something like const original setup equals schema form setup, right? So like this is our component constructor, I think so. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna return. Oh my god! Just do something like this. Can I open it again? Yeah, I think I can. Let me put a cheat sheet on the other screen that you can't see, fortunately. So I have. Okay, yeah, that makes it so much easier. So setup. So what we want to do, we want to create a new component here, so not really return yet. So we're going to do a new function, and we're going to create a new setup here, which is going to accept props and context, which are the regular arguments that you get from to which the setup is being called with. And what we're going to do first is let's do setup or original setup output, and then let's call the original setup with the props and the context. And this is kind of like calling super in classes, right? So now we have this plugins argument here. So what we want to do is, if there are no plugins passed to our factory, we just want to do plugins length and just return the original setup output, which in this case would create a schema form component with no changes to the original one, but there is an else variant here. So once we pass some plugins, what we can do here is do a return and then do plugins reduce, and then let's do output and then the plugin. Let me wrap it. Oops. And in here, we'll first start with the original setup. And then inside here, we're going to do return plugin. And then we're going to pass the output. And then we're going to pass props and context just in case they are needed, right? So now that we have here this, we can actually return a new component. And it's going to be schema form, which we can spread because unless it's being rendered, it's still just an object, right? So we can do schema form and then override the original setup that we took from here and just override it with the new one. So this is kind of like class inheritance, right? So yeah, it's not working yet, but we are getting there. So let's go back to our plugin example here. So we have our schema form factory, we have it here, and we want to pass some plugins to make validations possible, right? So to do that, let's start with Vuelidate. So let's integrate it with Vuelidate. So this is our based output. So maybe let's say it like, or just setup output. Yeah. Okay. And then what we need to do is we have to let the plugin parse the schema that we got and extract those validation properties, right? So we're gonna do just that. So first we need to take the parsed schema that we have. Let me show you again. That we have from we can take from our schema form. So this is our parsed schema. As you can see, it's a computed property. So let's get it back here. So we're gonna do const parsed schema from setup output. And then we need to take extract the validations. So in this case, we're going to do const schema with form validations. Whoa, that was smart. No, that's the wrong thing. Let's just do schema with Vuelidate. Oh yeah, that's better. And then let's take the parsed schema value, because this is a computed property and a reference view, we have to use the value to access the actual value. And then we're going to do a map, and then we take the element and we're going to return so the object, like the whole thing, or actually this part. And then we're going to override the component that we had there with a component that will be supporting or will be Vuelidate inside. And for that, we're going to use another trick or pattern that you might know or not. And let's see who guesses it. So when I type it. So with Vuelidate, our component. So this is that's gonna be it. So let's just return. We do setup output, and then we're gonna override the parsed schema. So parsed schema alts schema with Vuelidate. Although we still need to, because this was a computer property, we need to wrap this thing inside a computer property to maintain the type component. Oh, sorry, computed. And now this is going to be a computed property the same way this was a computed property that we received, right? So let's create this with Vuelidate function. So let's gonna create it here as a function with Vuelidate. We take a component here as an argument, and then what we're gonna return is another component, which gonna have a setup on its own, where we get props, we get the context from which we'll take the attributes, and then we need to take the our contents. So in this case, we're gonna do, I think we need to just close your eyes for a second. If you haven't seen anything, perfect. Okay, so what we're gonna need here is props. We're gonna do model, gonna do model value, and we're gonna do validations. This is required so that those properties will be extracted from our attributes and available as props, so that we can do const model, model value, and validations. And then we're gonna do two refs, and we pass props here. This is gonna transform all of the props into references. We can use those later. So const property name, which will be the model or the property that we want to validate. And the model is something that is created by the schema form itself when it is parsing the original schema that was passed into an array form where the model is the key. So in this case, this is the model, right? First name, last name, and email. And those are also the properties that we want to validate, right? So we get it here as the model. And then what we need to do is to just do Vuelidate results equals use Vuelidate. And we need to pass the rules and also the state, and then the property name that we want to use to register it. So we're first gonna pass the rules. So it's gonna be property name and then validations value. And we pass the state, and that's gonna be again property name, and this is gonna be model value, which is the current value of the property. And then we're gonna register it under property name. Property name. And that's almost it. Now we just need to render this component, and actually not this component, but the original component that we passed here. So we're gonna do, and this is a new thing for many of you. So instead of just returning, we could do return and then those properties and some other elements, and then just do a render function here, right? If you're familiar with render functions in Vue. But instead, what we can do is return a function here, and then just do h, which is something that I imported from Vue, which is used to render components or anything, actually. So we're going to do render comp, and then we're going to pass the props to it. So in this case, it's going to be props, attributes, and also Vuelidate results. And this is what you would call a higher order component that by itself is not really rendering anything. Like there are no extra drifts, no anything. What it does is creates a new Vue instance around, creates the validation rules, uses Vuelidate, and then it extends the list of props that it's going to pass or forward to the component, to the original component, with this Vuelidate results prop, right? Okay, so now that we have it, we can go to our plugin example, and this is our plugin, Vuelidate plugin. So we're just gonna pass it here, and I hope it's right. Oh, not yet. Binary. Okay, so here is our Vuelidate plugin, and if I save, it's probably not gonna work either. Oh, probably simplified. Theme. I just hope I haven't messed up anything. Okay, I think it looks okay though. Yeah, let's move to the or maybe not. Second. No, it should be good. So we have the schema from factory, use Vuelidate. Okay, so we can move to our another part for, because this only is additional prop, and we are not really handling this prop in any way so far. So we need, am I returning it properly here? Oh gosh. Schema on Vuelidate, computed parsed schema. Yeah, it looks okay. Let me just see here if I got this part right. Yeah, prop context. Yep. Okay, looks all right. Okay, let me move to the use with errors plugin, which will be the second plugin that will allow us to use our errors list component, so that next to our input we'll have our errors, the list of errors. Still not sure why this is not working properly. Oh gosh. Okay, I see. I think there is a typo somewhere here. Prop. That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very unhelpful. Nobody just corrected me on the typo. I guess that's the problem with remote conferences. Too bad I can't be there in person. As in, I guess nobody is there in person except for the organizers. Well, okay. Now that we got it covered, let's move to our with errors component, our plugin. So here we're going to do a very similar thing as we did with the Vuelidate plugin. So we need this. We need to take the parsed schema. We need to make a new property, which will be the schema with errors or errors list. And then we do the computed, same parsing, and so on, where we just do with Vuelidate, or which is not with Vuelidate anymore, but with errors. Right? And we pass the original component here. We have nothing else changes here. What we need now is another higher order component that will use this errors list component that we passed here. And what I will move it here, function that we'll be using to render. So you can use any component with this plugin to render any, or choose any component that you want to handle the validation results. Or I guess that would be a nicer way to put it. So comp, very similar, but in this case, we're gonna return a functional component in Vue 3, which is just a function in this case. So we're gonna do props and then atts, And let's just take the errors. So in this case, it's gonna be const errors equals props. And I think it was Vuelidate results, right? And then errors, because we only care about the errors here. And then we're gonna return. And this is also something, well, it isn't really new, because you're able to do it even currently with Vue 2.x, but what I will be doing is returning a component that has more than one root node. So, well, not a root node. There are two nodes at the root. Okay, whatever. So first, we're gonna render the original component, and we're gonna pass all of the props. We're gonna pass all of the attributes. And then we're going to pass something which is very specific to my form inputs, which is invalid. Invalid. I'm going to do errors length. And this is going to take care of the border, the red border. And then the next thing what we're going to do is render the errors list component and there we're going to just pass the errors list that we got here. And we're just going to pass it here. And this should be done. Now I just need to actually use this plugin. So here, I'm just going to do this. And we're going to pass the errors list components that we want to use. And hopefully, and keep your fingers crossed, I'm keeping mine. So, oh, shit. Well, I think I just messed up something. Let me. Oh yeah, obviously. So first, return function setup output. Oops. Yep. Vuelidate results. Vuelidate results. That's okay. Oh yeah, I know what's wrong. I need to reverse the order. Now error is undefined. Jesus God. It's going even worse than I was hoping. Okay. Factory, Validator plugin. Okay. So, what did I miss? Is Vuelidate props component? Vuelidate results. Let me copy this. Then use errors. We have. You're probably having a lot of fun right now. There's probably some very obvious issue here that I'm just not seeing. And is it? Huh. Okay, if you could close your eyes for a second, and let me just paste the correct solution. Perfect. And now it works magically. This would be so easy if every problem could be solved by just copying a working solution. Oh wait, that's Stack Overflow, right? So anyway, so now that I start typing, you can see that our form now has applications. And yeah, that's it. The button doesn't do anything. Okay, I think I can go to the keynote, which is less stressful, and continue with the talk. So, and Formulate or Formulator is already released in the, I think it was released yesterday. So you can try it out. There are the new docs. And for the plugin architecture, we already have a Lookup plugin, which is plugin that allows you to map certain component names or just like type text into a component that is handling text input. So if you would like to use it for your own schemas that you get from the backend, for example, like this is something that you should try. And there is also a work in progress version of the plugin. Oh my god, Vuelidate plugin that you can also see, which looks about the same as in the presentation here. When it comes to the roadmap, we are planning to work on some adapters for popular UI libraries like Unify, for example. We also want to add some parsers for some also popular schema formats, for example, JSON schema. And of course, we will be accepting any plugin. I mean, you can create your own. Like, we don't really have to accept anything. It's up to you. But we hope that the community will create plugins of their own, so it gets even better, as in the form solution. Yeah, that's it. Here is the Vuelidate team: Marina, Tonina, Natalia, who is also here. Hey, Natalia, Dobromir, and yeah, that's me. And thank you very much. This is where you can find me. You can find the demo code on the github.com/Chantal/Vuelidate, whatever. You can see on the screen. There is a new branch called New. That was obvious. With the version, today's version of the demo. And as always, you can choose to sponsor me on GitHub or follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and yes, maybe see you next year in person. Hey. And also questions, I guess.
Hey, okay. Daniel. And first of all,
and I will go on.
First, thank you for the amazing talk. It was really good, and I can totally relate to all the difficulties with the live coding that reminded me so hard about my own fails. And I was like totally with you, but unfortunately on our stream I had really small font, so couldn't help. However, let's start with some questions. Obviously, you're one of the persons who are the most familiar with Vue plugins, especially Vue plugins for Vue 3. Now that many people touched them already, so we had lots of questions about how would you build a plugin for Vue 3? Would you do it the same way we had for Vue 2 with extending prototype, or with composition API somehow, with provide inject, or whatever?
I guess the most obvious answer here would be it depends, right? Like, what is the plugin doing? If it were like a global plugin, then I would probably use the new API, which allows you to when you create a new Vue app using create Vue app. Oh my god! You can use app.use on the new Vue application instance to register a global component, and it's going to work pretty similar to how it was when you were extending the prototype. But if you only need a component a plugin within a specific fragment of the component tree, or maybe you just need it in specific pieces of your application or fragments of your application, I would probably go with the provide inject approach, where at some point in your application you just do use plugin inside setup, and then or register plugin in a setup, which would create or provide some functionality that then would be accessible for all of the child components, or like any descendant, where you would probably just be doing use this plugin's functionality, and the whole provide inject part in this case would be fully invisible for the user. So it should also make up for a pretty nice developer experience, but also give you a lot of flexibility for like scoping some of the functionalities of your plugin. And in cases like Vuelidate, which supports two of those approaches, which is a global registration to make it backwards compatible, so you can still use the validations property on the component declaration. But also, you don't really have to register it globally and just use Vuelidate in a setup in a component that actually needs it. So it probably just figure out like which is the required approach, as in the most efficient approach. If your plugin is just for one of the application, just do it locally. How previously you could do it with a mixin, for example. But if you need it everywhere, for example, if you were building an translation plugin, then probably the app.use approach, where the plugin would be out through the whole application. But also, what it could do within the app.use could be just use a provide inject to provide the functionality or some context or some like initial configuration, so that in the child components you could still just do like use plugin functionality A to still make use of the context that is provided by the original configuration of the plugin, but use it within this component. So there are many new options, and I think the biggest change here is how you can build the components itself, rather than, sorry, not components with plugins, because Composition API allows us to just go crazy when it comes to, compared to Vue 2.x, when it comes to how we can build the plugins. Thank you.
Damian, I believe we still have only 40 seconds, so very quick question. Do you already have a date for Vuelidate release?
Oh my God. That's sudden. 25 seconds. Can I make something up in this case? I think we are pretty close to stable release. We managed to fix most of the issues regarding backwards compatibility. I can't really give a date, but I think once Vue 3 is released, we will try to work in release same day or week, probably week. I think.
Yeah, sorry, looks like I have a mute button and I forgot second time in a row. Yeah, it's you know, two yellow cards and one red card. Thank you very much for your talk, for comments. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but it was a big pleasure to see you and hear you. Thanks, Natalia. Thanks, Damian.